posted some TikToks about what my favorite ultimate go-to 5-star book recommendations are, but if you've ever wanted to hear me go more in depth and just really yap about some of these books, then you are in the right place. So obviously, if you know literally anything about me, then you know that we're gonna have to get these out of the way. So some of my all-time favorite books are Vicious and Vengeful by V. Schwab. This is the villain's duology. Currently it's a duology. I believe that there will be a third book called Victorious coming out at some point in the near future, which I'm absolutely salivating for. I literally cannot wait. But at the moment, these two can stand like by themselves as a series if you want to go ahead and read them right now, which I think you definitely should. So the premise for our first book is that we have our two main characters, Victor and Eli, who are going to this like very prestigious university, and they are both medical students that are about to start working on their dissertation. They are roommates also and kind of best friends. They have a very weird relationship, okay, which you will realize as you start to read on. But one of them is working on their dissertation and decides that he is like interested in the combination of like how adrenaline and fear and near-death experiences can affect the human body. So they start doing experiments together and basically give themselves supernatural abilities. So Eli's power is that he can like regenerate and heal himself no matter how he gets wounded, basically. And Victor's power is that he can basically control pain for himself or for other people. Like he can ratchet up the pain someone is feeling or completely take it away. If you want morally gray characters and you're interested in like a villain origin story kind of vibe, then these books are absolutely where it's at. I wish I could find something else similar to them, but I have been searching and searching since I first read these books like 5 years ago, and I honestly still haven't found anything that compares. So let me know actually if you have a recommendation for anything that is kind of similar to these. Then continuing with our whole dark academia thing that we've got going on here, we have Babel by R.F. Kuang, or Babel. I still haven't actually figured out how to say the name of this book, even though it is one of my favorites, but I'm just gonna go with Babel. So this book is like a historical fantasy dark academia mashup. Honestly, I really haven't read anything else like it. It's set in Oxford in 1836. So obviously there's some real elements like Oxford being a real place and a real school, but Babel, the translation institute that this book takes place in, is of course not a real place in Oxford, England. Our main character in this book is a young boy from Canton who is brought to Babel to be one of its translation students. He ends up becoming friends with a few of the other students that are there as well, and not only is this book just so well written, it's also a really interesting kind of think piece on colonialism and how translation and language is a big element of that. This is one that I'm probably going to be consistently rereading forever. The ending absolutely brought me to tears. It is seriously just like such a gut punch. But I absolutely love this book, and I love everything else that I've read by R.F. Kuang, so she's one of my favorite authors for sure. And then I'm gonna be brief on this one because I think we all know how I feel, but this book, The Secret History by Donna Tartt, really started and solidified my love for dark academia. I feel like it is kind of the original blueprint. So if you don't know what The Secret History is about, I'm gonna give a very short, brief explanation of the premise. So we have this group of friends that are going to this like very prestigious art college, and the main character whose perspective that we are reading from is not really like in on their group. He's kind of an outsider. He didn't grow up wealthy like the rest of them, and he's like on scholarship at this school. He sees this group of students with a professor on campus every day that are studying the classics, so they're like speaking Greek and Latin, and they kind of have just like this very mysterious air about them, and he sees our little group and is basically like, I want in on that. So he joins their cohort. It's really just kind of an interesting character study. Obviously something very bad happens. I'm not gonna get into it because that's spoilery territory. I just have such a love for this book, and honestly like the whole aesthetic just makes it for me. Then obviously, of course, I absolutely love Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Leigh Bardugo in general, one of my favorite authors. Ninth House is like a quintessential dark academia. I truly believe that Leigh wrote this book for people who are fans of that genre because it just has like every trope, all of the imagery and aesthetic, and like everything you could ever want. So this plays off Yale's secret societies, which are actually like a real thing. That was really interesting to me. I think Leigh is like a fellow or something at Yale. So the settings are all accurate to real life, except for obviously a few of them that are like fantasy and made up, but like the setting of Yale in general and like the locations of the different tombs of the secret societies are, to my understanding, accurate. Like you can actually go visit them, which I just think is like so cool. Our main character isn't in one of the actual societies. She's in a society called Leith House, which is basically just like responsible for monitoring the activities of all of the other societies and making sure that they're like not doing anything wrong, but of course they all always are. Each of the societies is kind of like responsible for doing different things, but as a whole they're all basically responsible for like everything that's going on in like culture and politics in the real world. So for example, they can like perform a ritual to make an author like really successful. Essentially they're just kind of like pulling the strings behind everything, and our main character Alex is in the society that is supposed to help like monitor their activities. However, this is kind of a similar situation to The Secret History, where Alex, the main character, is from a very different background than all of the other characters who are going to Yale are from. She didn't grow up with money. She actually had like a very traumatic childhood, so make sure that you check the trigger warnings for this one. But the reason why she has been allowed into Leith is because she is able to see ghosts, which is like a very essential part of monitoring the rituals that the rest of the societies are performing. And amid all of that kind of happening, there is also like a murder mystery going on that she is determined to solve. I just absolutely love this book. I think that it's so atmospheric, and I'm gonna be fully transparent and say that I actually have not read the sequel Hellbent because I'm kind of like saving it for when I'm really in the mood to savor it, maybe this fall, but honestly probably sooner, because I'm really excited to read it. If you've read the first book, you know there's kind of like a big cliffhanger that you're waiting to get resolved, and I'm hoping that that's gonna happen in this one. Okay, so speaking of prequels, we of course have the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. So if you don't know, Cassandra Clare has this like entire huge overarching series that's like kind of made up of a few different series, and it all falls under the like Shadowhunters world. It's kind of like Marvel, honestly. It's like the Cassandra Clare cinematic universe. This is the prequel trilogy to the Mortal Instrument series, which I think is like the most popular series out of the whole Shadowhunter world, although in my opinion is the weakest. I would not recommend starting there because I think honestly if you start with the Mortal Instrument series, you're gonna be like not into it and not really get it. So this prequel series is about the ancestors of the people in the Mortal Instruments. Also, I love how these spines line up. So the series starts with Clockwork Angel, then we have Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess. And my reasoning for loving this series so much is the characters in this trilogy. There's 3 main characters. I read the series for the first time when I was in like 8th grade. For reference, I'm 22 now, and I still think about them like, I'm not kidding, probably every day, at least every other day. The series has the best love triangle of all time, and I know some people are like absolute haters of the love triangle trope, but I just feel like that means that you haven't read the series yet, because it is absolutely gut-wrenching. Like, I was unwell reading the 3rd book, so if that's the kind of vibe you want, then I would highly recommend this series and then go into reading all of the other books after. Okay, another YA fantasy series that's one of my all-time favorites is, of course, the Six of Crows duology, more books by Leigh Bardugo. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that there is actually a like prequel, or it's not really a prequel, but it's just kind of like a trilogy that takes place in the same world as these books that some people say you should read before you read these. In my opinion, you don't have to, because the Shadow and Bone series, which is what I'm referencing, doesn't have the same characters in this series. It's just set in the same world, and it kind of has like a deeper explanation of the world so that you can have that in your mind when you go into reading these books. In my opinion, the Shadow and Bone trilogy is much weaker in comparison to this one, and honestly I found myself getting kind of bored reading that one. I don't think it's a skip, especially if you read the series and you absolutely love these books. Then I would say maybe go back and read Shadow and Bone just so you can like have more in the same world, but if you haven't read either, would recommend starting here. So like I said, these are like YA fantasy heist books, but the reason why I absolutely love these so much, and also why I think everybody else loves these books so much, is the found family in this series is absolutely like my favorite ever. I don't think I've ever found anything that compares since reading these books. And the like slow burn romance is absolutely one of my favorites. I also just love the setting. Honestly, everything about them. Leigh Bardugo just does the like dark gothic setting and vibe so well. Okay, another V. Schwab book, obviously The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This book has gotten its flowers, especially on TikTok, but I'm gonna put it in this video because I think that it absolutely deserves them. This, in my opinion, is V. Schwab at her best writing wise. There were so many quotes and passages in this book that I had to underline because they're just absolutely stunning. Also, this edition is so cool. This is like the UK edition, I think. So our main character in this book obviously is Addie LaRue. It starts out in France in 1714, where we have this young girl, Addie, who is about to be forced into an arranged marriage that she really wants no part of. So she essentially makes a deal with the devil that is going to allow her to be totally free and do whatever she wants. However, she doesn't realize that this deal is also going to make her immortal and memorable to no one. So basically, anyone that she ever meets doesn't remember her as soon as she is out of their sight. So she can't really make any meaningful connections or relationships with anyone. She's just like doomed to go through all of eternity alone until one day she meets someone who remembers her, and I just love this book. Okay, another fantasy duology that absolutely ate down, in my opinion, is the Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig. So we have One Dark Window and then Two Twisted Crowns. I read these books this past fall and they are just the perfect fall book. I don't know what it was. I think it was just like the timing. Like I was really in the mood for these books and they absolutely hit for me, especially the first one. In my opinion, I like the first one better. A lot of people like the second one better. I think that's just up to personal preference. But these books are so cool because the magic system is really interesting. It's like based on cards, so people who possess different cards can do different things. Like for example, there's a maiden card which can make the person who has it like especially beautiful. There's other cards that can allow you to control other people, etc. And I think it's just really interesting how these cards can be passed off and taken away and kind of change the whole dynamic of everything that's going on. I also absolutely loved the romance in this book. I don't think it was too much. It wasn't like the forefront of the story, but it definitely kept things interesting. It just has like very dark gothic vibes. Again, perfect for fall. If you're seeing this right now, I would put it on your TBR, but wait until September, October. And then lastly, for my YA recommendations, I have Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is going to be a quartet, I believe, and I've only read the first book. The second book, Bloodmarked, is out right now, and I think the third book, Oathbound, is coming out next year, I believe. I absolutely loved Legendborn, and I've heard that Bloodmarked is even better, so I can't wait. This book is so interesting because it is playing off of Arthurian legend. So our main character is actually 16, but she's doing this like college program at UNC Chapel Hill. So when she first gets there, she ends up witnessing this like demon attack that she wasn't supposed to see, obviously, because no one else in this world like knows that magic is real. And she ends up meeting a group of students who call themselves Legendborn. These Legendborn students have the responsibility to fight these demons, but their powers actually derive from them being descendants of the characters in Arthurian legend, if that makes sense. So Bree kind of becomes wrapped up in their society and ends up joining it herself. One of the reasons I love this book so much is that Bree is essentially the only black student that is a member of this like Legendborn society, and I think that Tracy Deonn really like expertly shows the struggles and the challenges that Bree faces because of that. Like she doesn't glaze over it even though it's a YA book, and I just thought it was so well done and so insightful. And honestly, I think this is just like a must read for everyone because even though this is a YA fantasy, this is like adult fantasy level good, but still appropriate for younger readers and adults. And then obviously no ultimate like book recommendations video that I make will be complete without The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Okay. This is another YA fantasy series. So our main characters in this book are basically this young girl and then a group of like prep school boys. I'm just gonna hold this one up because obviously holding the whole series is not working out for me. Our female main character in this series is Blue, and she is a psychic. She comes from a family of women that are all psychics, and she ends up befriending this group of boys who go to Aglionby, which is like the prep school in the area. The kind of a leader of this like boy group is Gansey, and Gansey is convinced that there is a dead Welsh king buried in their town, and he is like devoting all of his energy and time into trying to find him. And they basically kind of team up with Blue, and Blue is assisting them in their search. I just love all of the different dynamics within this group of 6 main characters. I think there's a lot of room for exploration between kind of their different sub dynamics within the group, and Maggie Stiefvater does does a really good job at exploring all the different characters. Overall, I just think this is like a really well done YA fantasy series, but it's not like too YA, like it's not giving too juvenile. Okay, let's get the Sarah J Maas section out of the way because I think we all know. So obviously my go-to recommendations for anyone that is trying to get into fantasy, specifically fantasy romance, is the ACOTAR series by Sarah J Maas. I read the series like 5 or 6 years ago, whenever the first book and the second book were out, and I absolutely love them. They like changed the trajectory of my life and also altered my brain chemistry, and I just could not love them more. I'm sure all of you know what they're about, but you know, very smut fantasy books. And also some of my favorite characters of all time. I'm an Asriel girl till I die. Okay, and then obviously we have Throne of Glass. I'm actually currently reading Kingdom of Ash, so I can't speak to that, although I'm certain that it's gonna be a 5 stars and I'm absolutely gonna love it. Throne of Glass is definitely one of my, just in general, favorite fantasy series of all time. Has some of my favorite characters, just everything. Obviously this is a time commitment, but it is very much worth your time, and honestly the books don't feel this long to me because you're just like flying through them. And because I've gotten questions about the reading order of this series before, I'm just gonna go ahead and address that now. I know that this is controversial, but I say read Assassin's Blade first. I'm a person that just in general, I usually like to read or watch prequels for anything first because I like to kind of have the background information to go into like the actual series itself. That's how I feel like stories are generally most impactful for me. So if you're that kind of person that like you want to read the prequel first, just in general for movies or books, then I would recommend starting with Assassin's Blade. I also am 100% a proponent of the tandem read, which is where you read, these are out of order, but it's where you read Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn at the same time because they are taking place at the same time but following different characters. I don't feel like that's as controversial. I feel like most people will tell you to do the tandem read, and I'm definitely like on board with that. It was such a cool and fun reading experience, and honestly, like when else do you get to do that with books? And then of course we have Crescent City. I actually feel like Crescent City might be my favorite Sarah J Maas series. I definitely would put it above ACOTAR, but I don't know if it can top Throne of Glass for me, especially since I haven't finished Kingdom of Ash yet. I would, like most people say, not recommend reading these first if you haven't read any of the other Sarah J Maas books. I love how deep she goes into the world building on these. I found it just really immersive, and again, love the characters in these so much. Okay, moving on to my romance recommendations. I have a few go-to authors, one of them being Ali Hazelwood. These are my favorite Ali Hazelwood books. Obviously, we have The Love Hypothesis, which was a huge book talk book. It's fake dating in like a STEM grad school setting. And my favorite one by her is actually Love Theoretically. This is another adult romance in like her STEM series. And I just absolutely love the main characters in this book. I love Jack. This one absolutely had me like kicking my feet and screaming. It was a 5 star and I need to reread it soon. Honestly, if you just want like a shot of serotonin, this is your book. Then another one of my favorite romance, but also I think like kind of contemporary fiction author is Emily Henry. I read all of her books except Funny Story because it just came out, and these two are my favorite. Beach read, one of my all-time favorite books. This is absolutely a 5 stars for me, and obviously like the ultimate beach read, even though it takes place on a lake. I don't know, her books are weirdly titled sometimes. And my other favorite is Book Lovers. This is like if a Hallmark movie were made into a book, but a lot less cringy, in my opinion. Our FMC in this book is a literary agent, and our MMC in this book is a book editor, and it's kind of like enemies to lovers. Obviously they're not really enemies, so it's like dislike to lovers, but it also takes place in like a very Hallmark small town, and it's just really cute. Then we have The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is actually a new favorite for me. I read The Dead Romantics, her other book, a while ago, and that one wasn't my favorite, so I was skeptical going into this one, but I had heard some really good things about it, so I decided to just give it a try anyway. This one has like a touch of magical realism. So our main character in this book inherits her aunt's apartment, and this apartment has this like magical twist to it where sometimes she'll walk in her apartment and it'll be 7 years in the past, and the person who lived there 7 years ago will just be like, hey. And in this case, the person who lived there 7 years ago is a very hot chef and essentially becomes the love interest for our main character, and everything about this book is just so good. and it made me cry. Then we have Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is actually the only Abby Jimenez book that I've read, which feels so wrong, and I'm going to rectify that situation very soon, don't worry. This is the first book in the like interconnected standalone Part of Your World series, so that's why I started with this one. This is actually an age gap romance, which is the only age gap romance that I've ever read, except the female main character is actually the older one in this book, which is I think the only way that I would actually like an age gap romance, because there's something just like really creepy about the guy being the older one. Don't like that at all. So the FMC, Alexis, is an ER doctor that comes from like a dynasty of very rich and famous doctors, and the MMC in this book is from a small town and he runs a bed and breakfast. So that's obviously where the whole like Part of Your World shtick comes from, because like she's a city girl and he's a country boy. It's just adorable, very wholesome, and also very well written and clever, and this one also made me cry. So I guess it's just not really that hard to make me cry, apparently. Okay, so then we're gonna do mystery thrillers really quick because I only have a few. Obviously, we have the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. These are like YA mystery thriller books. If you are in a reading slump, these books would be absolutely my first recommendation. They are just so fast-paced and quick to get through. The reveals are very good in all of them, and they're just like highly entertaining and some great characters. And I believe that the first season of the show is actually coming out shortly. Then we have The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is a 4-book series. I don't have the 4th one because it hasn't come out in paperback yet, and obviously I want them all to match. But the first book is, of course, The Thursday Murder Club. This series is about a group of retirees living in the English countryside, and obviously they get together on Thursday and solve murders. I just love the writing in this book. It's kind of like mystery combined with like literary fiction. I love that the characters in these books are all older people. I just think that that's really interesting and kind of refreshing from all of the other books that I read that are about like 20 to 30-year-olds. They're also just like really engaging because obviously there's a mystery element to all of them. As you're reading, you want to know what happens. Just very wholesome reads. And then lastly, we have just like my favorite general fiction / literary fiction reads. Don't have very many of these because that's not a genre I read a ton of, but coincidentally, these are actually like some of my top favorite books of all time. So maybe I should read more in that genre. So first, obviously, we have Daisy Jones and the Six. I think this might be like my #1 favorite book of all time. However, if you do read this book, I absolutely recommend listening to the audiobook on Audible. It's narrated by an entire cast of characters, and they just like really painted the picture for me in my brain. I've listened to the audiobook twice, and I'm sure that I'll listen to it probably again. This is about a fictional band that I believe is inspired by Fleetwood Mac. So this takes place in like the 70s and 80s, and the two main characters in this book, Daisy and Billy, are just like everything to me. I honestly can't really get into it because spoilery territory, and also I'll probably start crying. So I love this book with everything in me, and it's my like life's mission to get everyone I know to read it. Then we have another Taylor Jenkins Reid book. This is Malibu Rising. I read this book on the beach last year, which is I think why it made it onto this list, because reading this book on the beach was just like the ultimate perfect beach read experience, obviously, as I'm sure you can tell from the cover. This is another one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's like historical fiction about famous people, basically. So we actually have cameos from some of these characters in this book. It's about a family of very famous surfers, and it takes place in Malibu in the 80s. Then, anything Frederick Bachman I absolutely love, but my favorite of his books is Beartown. This is actually a 3-book series, but I absolutely love the first book so much, if you can't tell. Done a lot of annotating on this one. Again, definitely check trigger warnings on this one. This book is kind of about like an entire town, but mostly about the hockey team that the town kind of revolves around, and I absolutely love the characters, the writing, everything about this book. Again, made me cry a lot. And then lastly, we have my most recent read. I know that some people characterize this book as a fantasy. To me, this is like more of a contemporary literary fiction, but it has obviously magical elements. Piranesi is a book that I would go into knowing as little as possible. That's what I did, and it's why I think I had such a good like 5-star reading experience. So the story is told from the perspective of our main character, obviously Piranesi, but it's via his like diary entries. That's all I feel like I can really say without getting into spoilery territory, but it's just such a fun book. It's also very short because you are kind of like slowly starting to realize what's going on alongside this character. Susanna Clarke finds a way of like telling you just enough through his journal entries that you're like, wait, is this happening? But you're not really sure. It honestly just has like such an unexpected ending for me. This was one of those books where I was like on Reddit googling what happened in the end for like an hour afterwards. It's definitely a great book for book clubs because you can have like so much discussion about what happens at the end of this book. So yeah, those are all of my ultimate go-to book recommendations. I've been compiling this list for like 6 or 7 years probably. All of these books are at least a 4-star for me. Most of them are like 4.5 to a 5-star territory for me. Obviously, I love them. So that's gonna be all for today's video. Make sure obviously you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.